I guess we'll launch into it. The other day, I think even yesterday, you said the more value on chain, the better for all of us. Yeah, it'd be good to understand why, what the thesis is there.
Yeah, so the more tokens, more value, whether it's a stable coin, tokenized fund, tokenized equity, tokenized commodity, the more things can interact on Ethereum, right? So it's actually one of the big advantages of Ethereum that there's this amazing community of people building tools and services like Chainlink and many others, where there's all these different multi-sig solutions. There's all these things that people can use to compose a reliable system, right? And more tokens and more value is, a pretty critical component to that. Where let's say you wanted to make some kind of diversified vault or something, now you don't just diversify it between the 5 different forms of wrapped other cryptocurrencies. Now you can make a diversified vault with a commodity and an equity and a stable coin inside of it, right? So you can just build more attractive things if there's more building blocks. And I view tokenized equity, tokenized commodities, tokenized funds as a category of kind of building blocks of value. So the more of them, the better. And then also it introduces more people to Ethereum and ETH and the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, totally agree. We're going to see some interesting securities at some point in time, some index products that will blow the minds. Yeah, going a little bit into the Ethereum piece here, a lot of this is happening on Ethereum. I think we have 50% plus market share in most financial products on-chain, up to 85%. I guess we're going to need to keep focusing and doubling down. In your opinion, where should Ethereum engage and support this next sort of wave of institutional adoption? What are the things that we really need to double down on?
Well, the thing with institutions is that they're very susceptible to sales. So if you have good business development and you can run a sales process to educate institutions, you have a big advantage. And one of the first things that I would recommend, which is actually happening right now, thanks to Ash and his great work, and Tomas and all the great people who have started to take the Ethereum Foundation towards institutional adoption, is really try to meet institutions on their level in the places that they understand, right? So this event's a great example. I saw a lot of familiar faces in the other room there, folks that are adopting or should be adopting Ethereum, and they're here on the 7th floor of the New York Stock Exchange, thanks to Ash and his team, doing basically business development, right? So business development in the enterprise world does work and does make sense and does give you an advantage, right? So Ethereum should have, through the Ethereum Foundation, through the effort of other groups like Chainlink, like Consensus and others, ways to educate more and more of the institutional population in the way that they're used to being educated, right? Which is a presentation, a meeting, these types of things. This is how they're used to understanding and interacting and buying software. That's more of like the top-down approach, right? Then there's the bottom-up approach. The bottom-up approach, Ethereum has a massive advantage in, because I would say across the whole blockchain ecosystem, as a percentage in terms of engineers, Ethereum has by far the most engineers and developers that want to build on EVM, right? So from the bottom-up point of view, the community that Ethereum has built is obviously working hugely in its favor. I think the thing that I would just think about there is, what are the tools and services that can make it easier for that bottoms-up developer community to build reliable institutional things easily, right? For example, the ERC20 standard made it easy to do tokenization on Ethereum. So you had an explosion of tokenization on Ethereum. In institutional context, you have ERC3643, you have a number of different kind of things that are going to make it easier for developers to build institutional grade things. Chainlink is a provider of those things. Chainlink data feeds, cross-chain bridging, identity and compliance contracts, these types of things. So I think what you really want is you want a good approach to the top, which is the BD approach, which is what's happening here, thanks to Ash and his team and the Ethereum Foundation's work. And then you want a bottom-up approach where developers fall in love with building things on the EVM, not just for ERC20 tokenization, but also institutional tokenization. So I think those two things happening will really propel things forward.
And it's the black swan in the room. I don't think many people would have picked you in a suit anytime soon, but here you are, the bridge, making it happen. On the ERC 3643 front, Dennis, I'll give him a shout out, Dennis O'Connell.
Dennis is the best. The best. If you have a chance to meet Dennis, take it. Guy's a genius.
Yeah, he's an advisor to the DTCC, doing some incredible things. $100 trillion they custody as securities on that book. So, good values, all right. Good values. All right. So, digging in a little deeper, I guess there's people from financial institutions here, asset managers that are looking to integrate this technology. You know, what can they be doing better? Where do they need to focus their resources? Is it on risk management? You know, where in these institutions do they need to place resources? And then on the crypto firm, native side, what language do we need to build? Where do we need to spend capital within these firms to make that happen?
So I'm realizing more and more after working with institutions for a few years now that there's kind of two paths inside of them. There's kind of the innovation path, and there's the commercial path. And so with the innovation team, you can do a lot of interesting stuff, and you can be on a path to production, and something can work out. But it's usually a little bit slower. But these are all, at the end of the day, commercial institutions, right? They're for-profit companies. So one of the things that I've seen happen more and more is you find a business line owner, right? You find someone who is excited about tokenization helping their business line, right? The person who sells money market funds, whatever, you know, the person who's going to say, hey, this is going to help my bottom line as a business head, as a business line owner, and I want to support this. And I think this will make the firm more successful. And those people have a lot of political capital to move things along, right? So I think those people, the people inside of firms, if they work in the digital asset teams, I think the market's at a place where they can go to the business head, the business line head, and convince them to get together with them and actually go into business, right? And that's going to help them move a lot of stuff forward. Then there's always a whole bunch of process stuff and onboarding, vendor onboarding, which we're going through with a lot of institutions, which is inescapable. That always is going to create some amount of delays. There's committees and all this stuff. But I guess the main thing I would say is I would align the success of your digital asset thing with a commercial success of some kind, because that's going to give it a lot of attention and longevity inside of that institution. From the crypto community's point of view, you know, I'm in a sport coat, you're in a very nice suit. You're right, we wouldn't have been wearing this, you know, well, me, I don't know, but Ethereum Foundation, I don't know. Look, basically a couple of years we wouldn't be wearing it.
Yeah, I was in hoodies not long ago.
You really need to meet people at their level in the institutional world. So if you're in the crypto community and you have any ideas about like killing the banks, or we don't need the banks, or this, that, the other thing, like, you know, I don't know, just don't go to any meetings. You know, go do something else. Don't meet with institutions. You know, if you have these ideas, and if you're gonna like convince them of something about that, you really need to find a way to make it attractive for institutions, I guess is what I'm saying. And you need to show up and speak to them in the language and in the way that they're accustomed to and they understand. Because the best institutions, in my experience, they're used to people running after them, okay? That's what they're used to. So if you want to be successful with institutions, you have to run after them in the way that works, which means that you're trying to figure out how they can benefit from a relationship and benefit from implementing the technology, right? So I think the thing that the DeFi protocols are doing, you know, they're making like versions of themselves that are institutionally compatible. They're hiring people to sell that into institutions. That's good. But really, that's what it's going to take. I don't think there's going to be much success from the crypto folks, you know, putting on a T-shirt and talking to the institutions about how DeFi is the future, it's probably not going to work. Like what's going to work is an incremental approach where it's like, you can make this much more money if you just did what your competitors did and launched a tokenized fund. How many times are you going to have to get whooped by your competitors until you launch a tokenized fund? Maybe it's time for you to launch a tokenized fund because you can make this much money. You see how that's like, that makes sense? Versus like, here's a way that the whole world's going to change. That's what you need to do. That's not something I see all the time in reality. I see a lot of like, we're the future and you're screwed. That's not a great sales pitch. You know, that's not gonna, might be true, but you know, I think you know what I mean. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. It's a little counterintuitive. Peter Thiel came out in like the early 2010 era and said, if someone's wearing a suit in the tech space, I will never touch them. Sort of the opposite here. These are the biggest brands in the world. They're some of the oldest companies in the world. They do still carry some traditional elements to them. Just on the commercial piece, I guess Standard Chartered are a remarkable case. Rene Michaud, who leads that up, he's an Australian, so shout out to him. He's got a brilliant mind, 100% all in on open permissionless blockchains. They've got a brilliant researcher, Jeffrey Kendrick, global head of digital asset research, and Scott Bessent quotes him all the time on the $2 trillion figure with stablecoins and then RWAs. Super commercial, but they make it work in this open environment. So they're a case to really look into. How should developers, think about this infrastructure? What are their options? What are their choices in bringing like a scalable, secure on-chain application to Ethereum, to the L2 ecosystem? What do they have at their hands today?
So through my experience in the blockchain industry, I've really come to gain a new appreciation of risk. And so if you're a developer, what is the risk that you're managing, right? You're managing the risk that your application takes in value and loses that value, right? Because there's smart contract hacks, which you have audits for. There's private key security, which you have wallets for, and multi-sigs. And then there's other systems, right? What are other systems? Other systems are, the data oracle, the bridging oracle, the thing that essentially controls that really secure contract you built, secured by those really secure private keys and that really secure custodian wallet, which even if all that really secure stuff happens, and then the data feed into your contract is hacked or broken or manipulated through market manipulation, or the bridging system you use to mint a variant of your coin is hacked and the coin is stolen, all that stuff you did before doesn't matter. Right? Because at the end of the day, the system failed and you lost money, and no one wants to use your system because you lost money. Yeah. So my view is that it's really great how our industry allows people to vertically focus on solving that problem for you, right? And here's a really good multi-sig. Here's a really good chain, Ethereum. Here's a really good auditor and contract that's been audited many times and is reliable. If you want to build applications that are actually going to hold people's money, I would think about security and risk, because for two reasons, actually for three reasons now with institutions. The first reason is sometimes it's easier to take risk and move a little bit faster to build something, but the problem is that later on, if your application actually gets any money into it, fixing the risk you started out in the beginning either is not possible or is really, really hard. The second thing is I've seen, and I'm talking about this because we have a lot of situations where someone, used the wrong data oracle or wrong bridge or something. They get hacked. They come to us. We get them on the reliable data oracle bridge and so on. And then, everyone always says, like, I wish I had just done this to begin with. So I think there's a dimension here of thinking about risk and managing risk. And then the third thing is really that institutions are very risk sensitive. And really the best the best DeFi protocols are also very risk sensitive. So for example, Aave only uses Chainlink for data, only uses Chainlink for bridging, only uses Chainlink for a whole bunch of stuff. Lido just switched to only using Chainlink for bridging, right? So as you become more valuable as a system, as a protocol, you don't want to take risk with people's money. You don't want to cut corners on security. That is kind of, I think, a responsibility that developers have that are building these systems that are going to end up holding people's money as smart contracts. So you need to balance that against, hey, I need to move really fast and get the thing out the door. And if you don't create the right balance, then people's money could be at risk. And also institutions are going to be very sensitive to how do you manage this risk? What are the systems connected to your contracts? How does that work? How do your contracts work? Like, they're going to really pay attention to this in the process of their diligence of, am I going to put my client's money in your DeFi protocol? That's going to be, a key factor.
Yeah, and I think you guys are doing some incredible work, right, around that whole piece of risk management. You've got a developer experience CRE that you've just announced with all the tooling to consider as you come to market, which I think is super valuable. I guess the privacy piece, Etherealized just, Valeria had a talk on it, and they're focused very much on privacy, institutional privacy. How do you think about it? How does Chainlink think about that in the adoption cycle moving forward?
Sure. So we have released our white paper on Chainlink confidential compute, which is basically creating a kind of co-processor alongside Ethereum to do private computations. And those private computations then get proven back onto Ethereum, but they're the pieces of the smart contract and the computation that you want to keep private. And that runs in the CRE, the Chainlink runtime environment, which we made live this week at the conference, at our SmartCon conference. And the Chainlink runtime environment really allows you to define a lot of conditions around what is going to happen relative to your contracts. And with confidential compute, you can make those conditions private, but you can still prove that those conditions and the code related to them was executed as it was supposed to be through trusted execution environments, zero-knowledge proofs, and at some point soon, I think, fully homomorphic encryption. I think that privacy really is a critical component, especially for institutions. And I think that, on-chain privacy, fully on-chain privacy will be costly, right? It'll be costly for those computations to fully happen on-chain, unless there's some really big cryptographic breakthroughs. So I think there will be parallel systems that sit alongside chains, generate privacy, but they do it in a way that they completely prove without, cryptographically, without any doubt, that the computation that was supposed to happen privately did happen privately. That's probably the model of privacy we have for now.
Makes sense, yeah. Interesting, it's like a horseshoe, right? The institutional privacy that bends right around to the cypherpunk version of privacy, both looking for a very similar thing. Last one. What is it that's special about the Ethereum ecosystem? What inspires people to continue to build on this infrastructure? What is this ecosystem doing that no other is when it comes to that developer journey?
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I think there's three big things. The first big thing is Ethereum has this change the world ethos that Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation, and the early people behind Ethereum did a really great job at getting a critical mass of people that have this kind of change the world mentality. And that's a valuable mentality in the modern world because a lot of people are looking to change the world, right? So, and change it in the ways that Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation and those early folks wanted to change it. So, that's a huge advantage, right? This thing didn't even, I don't think, well, depends who you are, but for many people, it wasn't just about like the token and flipping the token and making money. People actually believe in what Ethereum stands for because it stands for something. That's good. That brings a certain type and certain commitment from people that is not easy to get or possible to get if your whole thing is about commercial something or other. The second thing that I think Ethereum has is it has a critical mass of counterparties, right? So if I go live on Ethereum, even if the fees of Ethereum are slightly higher than another chain, I will have more people that can buy my thing, right? So my choice is go on another chain and pay less fees, but then my tokenized thing will get half the money. You know, instead of getting 100 million, it'll get 50 million in purchases. Or I can go on Ethereum, pay slightly higher fees, and I'll get 100 million in purchases. You know, when you're launching something, that additional 50%, that additional 50 million, that's important, right? You're thinking about how am I going to successfully launch? And the reason that happens on Ethereum, because there's so much money, so many keys, and I do see that happening for institutions, right? I do see UBS, I do see BlackRock, I do see a bunch of institutions going on chain and saying, hey, I'm going on Ethereum, whatever, the fees aren't as low as wherever, but like, my counterparties are on Ethereum, so I'll be on Ethereum, right? So that dynamic, I think, does translate to institutional land. And then the third one is the thing I mentioned earlier, which is the developer ecosystem and the immense amount of tooling, right? So in the sense that the Solidity language and EVM is kind of like the JavaScript of blockchain world, in the sense that, you know, it has its pros and its cons, let's put it that way, but there's definitely a ton of libraries, right? There's definitely a ton of services. There's definitely a bunch of tools that you immediately gain by, you know, writing something in Solidity and running it on EVM. And that universe of tools, which Chainlink is a big part of, right? Data tools, identity tools, bridging tools from Chainlink's point of view. But other tools, multi-sigs. Like there's chains that we start working with, they don't have a multi-sig. There's no multi-sig. Because nobody's built a multi-sig in their community, and the founding team of the chain is waiting for someone to, there's no, multi-sig doesn't exist on this chain. There's no multi-sig. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, how are we going to secure our contracts if your chain doesn't have multi-sig? And Ethereum has like, you know, 5 decent ways to do multi-sig, right? So it's that universe of tools and services and essentially libraries that developers can compose into useful things. So that, you know, Ethereum has by far the escape velocity on that. Off the top of my head, I would say it's those 3 things.
Thank you very much. We'll wrap it up there. There were 3 great points. We are changing the world. So thank you, Sergey, alongside.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.